nobody home. Love nor hope nor honor have I none, yet I will be married, I hope.
I hope nobody home. Love nor hope nor honor have I none, yet I will be married, I hope.
Not lost and ambitious, narcissistic needs entirely unmet. You take what you get.
I hope nobody.
Good morning, friends and fellow treasure hunters. Today I want to go over the Forrest Fenn story one more time. This isn't to change anybody's mind about where the Forrest Fenn treasure was found, but rather it's a documentary. Recently, the Forrest Fenn treasure was auctioned off at auction. It was auctioned off in individual lots and smaller lots. And one of the things that was auctioned off was the life history that was written by Forrest Fenn and put in the little bottle and then sealed with wax. The individual that bought that bottle said that within a year he was going to publish that document. And so this video is merely to establish a precedent, or establish my theory, my idea, my knowledge about where the treasure was hidden. I am 100% confident I know where it was hidden, and this is to document so that when the treasure location is revealed, if it ever is, that this video will be out there to show that I knew where it was. I'm going to go over the clues, all 9 of the clues from the poem. I'm going to go over the cheat sheet, all the other clues that Forrest has given, and show how all these things point to the location that I believe the treasure was at. Also, I am going to answer anybody else's questions. If you have any other clues that Forrest gave or that you perceive are clues, put it in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer those if I can. First and foremost, anybody that's not familiar with the thrill of the chase, this particular video is not really designed for those that don't know about the Forrest Fenn treasure. This is for those that have immersed themselves in the treasure, who look for it, and who have done a lot of research, and that will recognize these clues and understand what I'm talking about. Basically, in 2000, I'm going to see here, this was published in, see if it has a date. I don't think it does. That is fairly interesting. He didn't put a publication date in his first book. That may be because he didn't want people to know when he published this book. That may be too big of a clue for people. Basically, I became aware of the thrill of the chase in around 2010. And basically, Forrest hid a $1 million treasure in a brass treasure box, somewhere in the Rocky Mountain region. And he published a book that has the poem, which, if followed, will lead to the treasure. He said all that you need is in the poem to be able to find this treasure. And I literally took him at his word, and the location that I came up with was earlier than many of the other clues came out. But the location that I ended up at was a very, very complex jumble of rocks. It's a mountainside, a slope. There's two streams, many waterfalls, a lot of downfall timber, some older timber. There's an old mine with many mine tunnels and shafts. There's a lot of hiding places in that area. Literally hundreds. You could look in that area for 100 years and never find something if you didn't have some idea of what you were looking for or where the treasure was hidden. And I believe the reason that I failed to find it in the 10 years that I looked for it was I took one of his clues to heart, and that is, do not go anywhere an 80-year-old man wouldn't go. But on a couple of these trips, I took my dad with me, and he was in his late 70s. He was almost 80 years old. And he went to the top of the mountain with me, and so I think that's where my fatal mistake in the chase lie, in that I didn't look high enough, quick enough. Eventually I would have got to the area where I believed the chest was hidden, but not before something happened and somebody else found it. Now, do I believe that the individual that found the treasure found it fair and square? No, I believe there were some shenanigans that went on. Since, around 2016, I put trail cameras in this location to see if anybody else was looking for the treasure in this area. I was so convinced that I had the right area that I wanted to see if anybody else was looking in the area. And there were a few people that showed up on the trail camera. Some interesting people, as a matter of fact. They were deeply involved in the chase. But the individual in particular that is the most interesting was Jack Stoof. Jack Stoof showed up on my trail cameras late in the chase, and he knew exactly where he was going because he looked high. He didn't look low at all. I had 4 cameras down low. I had 2 up high. I had 1 by the parking area and 1 by the road coming in. And he never looked anywhere other than in one general specific location. That tells me that he had some insider's information on where to start looking. I'm going to read Forrest's poem, and we're going to go over these clues. As I have gone alone in there, and with my treasures bold, I can keep my secret where, and hint of riches new and old. Begin it where warm waters halt, and take it in the canyon down, not far, but too far to walk. Put in below the home of Brown. From there it's no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. There be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and waters high. If you've been wise and found the blaze, look quickly down your quest to cease. But tarry scant with marvel gaze, just take the chest and go in peace. So why is it that I must go and leave my trove for all to seek? The answer I already know. I've done it tired and now I'm weak. So hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold. Well, I'm just going to quickly go over what I think these clues are, and then I'll give some more of the answers to the other clues that Forrest Fenn gave later on. As I have gone alone in there, and with my treasure bold, I can keep my secret where, and hint of riches new and old. So he went alone in somewhere. Now, at one point I thought he went into an old mine or a cave. That's what made sense to me. Because he's keeping his secret where there's a hint of riches new, which would be his treasure, and old, which would be the old treasures or the old things that were found there, such as in a mine. An area of historical importance that had a treasure story or a mine, or gold was panned from the creeks. But he obviously went alone in there into a location, and he put his treasure where there's a hint of riches, new and old. And I believe the new riches was his treasure chest, and the old riches were an old mine, an old gold deposit, an old treasure story area, or something like that. Now, if we look at the area that I chose, the area that I ended up in the East Fork of the San Juan by the old Elwood mining area, there were a lot of gold and silver and precious metals taken out of that Elwood mining system. There's a lot of old mines in there. I found several very valuable and nice looking chunks of ore while I was there. And there were a lot of evidence of old mining in the past, down lower. There was a lot of gold that was panned out of the streams of Crater Creek and of Elwood Creek that come together to form the East Fork of the San Juan River, which literally forms where those two creeks come together, and precisely by the blaze, which is a huge rock formation on the mountainside that looks like a blaze. Begin at where warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down, not far but too far to walk, put in below the home of Brown. Now, many people are familiar with Pagosa Springs. It's a well-known hot springs. I think a lot of people have passed it off as a clue because it's fairly close to Forrest Fenn's home. It's only 157 miles pretty much due north of Forrest Fenn's home in New Mexico in Santa Fe. But if you were an old eccentric millionaire and you were hiding your treasure, would you want it to be very far from home? Somewhere you couldn't check up on it? I don't think so. Literally at Pagosa Springs, the warm waters halt. That's where the springs form, and that's where they end. They begin at Pagosa. As the water goes down, it turns back into cold water, and it flows down and joins into it's the San Juan River, the East Fork. It becomes the East Fork and the West Fork come together. That's where the canyon and from Pagosa Springs, the canyon outside of Pagosa, the water drops off the hill very rapidly. It's taken in the canyon down. Not far, but too far to walk, put in below the home of Brown. In one of Forrest's later clues, somebody asked him what too far to walk was, because he has a funny story in his first book about too far to walk, about when his brother and him got into argument, and his brother stopped the car and Forrest got out and walked. And Forrest was asked at one time by a person, how far is too far to walk? And Forrest gave the clue. He said further than 8.25 miles. Well, interestingly enough, from the outskirts of the town of Pagosa Springs to the turnoff of the East Fork of the San Juan River, it's over 8.25 miles. Depending on where you put the town limits, it's 8.26 miles to 8.35 miles. So somewhere in that area, but it's definitely a little over 8.25 miles. A very interesting clue. Put in below the home of Brown. So what is this home of Brown? A lot of people have often wondered what the home of Brown is. Now, there's actually two very good possibilities for what the home of Brown is right at the turnoff to the East Fork of the San Juan River. There's the home of David Brown. The old cabin that sits there is the home of the wealthy landowner David Brown. His cabin and his property sit right there. So right below his property is the turnoff that goes up to the old Elwood mine. And that could be the home of Brown, David Brown. There's also a very, very, very historic story about a lady by the name of M.O. Brown and her son that walked down from the old mining area in the dead of winter to Pagosa Springs. That's a historical story. You can find it online. It's very interesting. It tells about how significant of a walk that was. And anybody that has been in that country and knows what that country, that steep and rugged country is like, and how cold and deep the snow would be in the wintertime walking down from Elwood to Pagosa, that would be a very historic trek. And so the home of Brown could be M.O. Brown, because indeed you are putting in at the turnoff that goes to the old historical home of M.O. Brown. From there it is no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. There'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and waters high. Indeed, anybody that's been up the East Fork of the San Juan, up that road, knows that that road is no place for the meek. It's a very steep, rough, rugged, rocky. The road is, in some places, it's 300 or 400 feet or more straight off down into the river. And it's very rugged, and it's very narrow. If you meet a four-wheeler or a Jeep coming down and you're trying to go up, one of you is going to have to back up until you get to a wider place in the road. That road is no place for the meek. That's for sure. Indeed, there'll be no paddle up your creek, because you're not paddling up the creek. You're driving in a vehicle, a four-wheeler or a Jeep, beside the river. You're driving beside the river. You're driving up beside the creek. You don't need a paddle. Just heavy loads and waters high. The water is loaded with gold and silver. Loads are considered load-bearing ores, load-bearing material is what gold and silver is called. Placer gold is called load-bearing material. And the water is high. There's 3 or 4 places, depending on the time of year and how much runoff there is. There's at least 3 and sometimes 4 very significant water crossings that you have to cross with your vehicle. And during some times of the early spring, you're not going to take a vehicle across the water in a couple of places, because it is too swift, too deep, and it could tip your vehicle upside down and wash you downstream, down through the rugged canyon. The first time I went in there, I was in my big heavy four-wheel drive truck, and it pushed my truck sideways at one point until I caught traction again and went. It was a pucker moment. Since that time, when I went up in there, I made sure that the water had receded and was lower and flowing slower before I went up into that country. And the last few times that I went up in there over the 10-year period of the search, I literally took my four-wheeler because the road had gotten too rough and rugged. There were big boulders that were on the edge of the road, so the road was very narrow. Some places you had to basically hang out over the cliff to go around a big boulder or a downfall tree. And one of the times when I was in there was a big tree laying across the road. But I had a chainsaw, so I was able to cut it out of the way and go on. But it's not a place that you can go in the wintertime. Basically, you have about anywhere from 5 to 6 months of the year that you could possibly go into this area. And in a really severe winter like this year, you probably won't get up in there until early July or early or mid-July. If you've been wise and found the blaze, look quickly down your quest to cease. But tarry scant with marvel gaze, just take the chest and go in peace. This paragraph has some very elusive clues. And a lot of people have speculated, and myself as well, that if you've been wise and found the blaze, that wise is an owl. Wise is, a lot of people term that wise is an old owl. And so I was always looking for some owl sign, a carving in a tree, an old owl nest, or something that looked like an owl. And when I finally found the blaze, and in fact it took me 2 years after I found the blaze before I found the owl. But when I found the owl, it was beyond spectacular. I could not believe how much it looked like an owl, and literally it was looking right down onto the blaze. Look quickly down your quest to cease. Now this gives the clue that you need to be up high. And that was one of the mistakes that I made, as I was following his advice of don't go where an 80-year-old man wouldn't go. And I was thinking that Forrest was a normal 80-year-old man, but that's a trick clue, because Forrest was no normal 80-year-old man. He was a very active, adventurous person. He was a fighter pilot, Vietnam. He was a person that was very determined, and I think he'd go anywhere he wanted to go at any age. So you need to be high so you can look quickly down, and that's where the owl was. It was up high. It was higher than where I was looking, and it was kind of behind the trees, but when you get to the owl, you have a spectacular view right down onto the blaze. But tarry scant with marvel gaze. Tarry scant with marvel gaze. Why did he put that scant, that word scant, in there? I mean, there's 100 other words that you could put in there other than scant. Tarry shortly with marvel gaze. Tarry quickly, because one of the meanings of scant is for a short period of time. But I knew that scant had to be significant, and so I began investigating scant. I knew it was a construction term. I'd heard from some of the masons that I've worked with before. They called pieces of rock that were left over from when they were building fireplaces and rocking up around the windows and stuff in these custom homes. They called them a scant. A chunk of rock they called a scant before it was formed and made into a piece for building. It was a scant. Well, when I found the blaze, the entire blaze was a pile of scants. From the top to the bottom, there was 5 acres or more of scants. Literally, it was a maze of Where's Waldo. There were millions of hiding places in this rock pile, in this blaze. There were millions of hiding places. You could take that chest. I mean, if anybody that's been into a boulder field, a big boulder field of various sizes, not just the great big ones that you hop from rock to rock, but the ones that you amble over and climb over and go around. You know, there's holes down in there. I mean, there's a million hiding places in 5 acres of boulders. Tarry scant with marvel gaze. Well, when I first saw the blaze and recognized it as the blaze, it was marvelous to me because of the recognition, the dawning of how difficult finding that chest was going to be if it was hidden in that boulder field. It was literally a Where's Waldo of the chest of 5 acres of boulders that you could stick your arm down in the ground up to 4 feet or more, and you could literally reach down into the rocks and tuck something. You didn't have to bury it. You could just reach down and put it underneath a boulder that's on top of other boulders, or you could lay it down in on top of the ground down in there. And literally, I went over the bottom acre of boulders, and there's 5 or 6 acres or more. I went over that bottom section, the easiest section, at least 10 times visually with a flashlight, because you needed a flashlight to look down into the rocks, into the shadows, into the holes. And I also took my metal detector over that. But if he put it down in there a couple of feet, which I'm sure he did, most metal detectors aren't going to reach 2 feet down in the rocks. You know, most metal detectors, maybe if you had a deep seeking 2-box or something like that, that's what I needed, was some kind of deep seeking technology to be able to go over it. But I went over that lower section of the blaze, I don't know, 3 or 4 times with my metal detector, poking it down in the rocks, going over the top. And many times I would take my pocket knife out or a coin and I would put it down in the ground a foot or so, and the rocks blocked out all sign or signal of the metal detector. On top of that, I had to continuously ground balance the machine because there was so much iron and other metals in the rocks. Basically, it's a patch of ore that I had a very difficult time discriminating out for iron and anything else that was interfering. So it was a challenge. But when I first saw the blaze, it was like, you know, the music went off. It was like I had a sudden epiphany. I realized when my dad was with me, my 78-year-old father, he was 78 at the time. When we both walked up, we were walking up the hill and we first laid eyes on the blaze from a distance. I mean, I'd been to the area many times, but I'd come in and I was right underneath it and I couldn't see the whole thing, and I didn't really have a good picture of it when you're right underneath it. But when we were coming up this trail and we looked up and saw the blaze, we both just, I mean, we stopped and we looked at it and we looked at each other and we pointed, and both of us at the same time said, "There's the blaze." We knew it was a blaze. My dad was in the military. I've been in the military. My dad was a scoutmaster, a Boy Scout. I was a scoutmaster and a Boy Scout. Both of us knew and understood what a blaze was. An old pioneer blaze, an old military blaze, a Boy Scout blaze is a marker that tells where the trail is and announces which direction you're supposed to go to find the next blaze. It's 2 marks on a tree, a little mark and a big mark. Sometimes it's 2 marks of equal size. Sometimes the ovals are offset, which means go right. If they're offset the other way, it means to go left. Right there on the hillside in 5 acres of rocks was the biggest, prettiest blaze of rocks in the shape of a blaze. And just as Forrest said in one statement, the end of my rainbow. This blaze was literally a rainbow, red, yellow, blue, orange. The blaze was literally the colors of a rainbow across the spectrum. When my dad and I laid eyes on it from that perfect angle where we could see it, we both immediately recognized it as the blaze. There was no doubt in our mind. And we were very excited, and we spent a couple of days looking everywhere in that rock pile and in the woods around there and down below in the creek and around the waterfalls and in every hole, and I metal detected everything, and we really gave it a good search, but we didn't go high enough that time. Subsequently, I went back many times and slowly worked my way higher, and by the time I started getting to the area where the chest was hidden, where I believed that it was hidden, when I understood fully all the clues and I found the owl, that's when I realized where the chest was hidden. Because when you line up the owl and you get up to where the owl is and you line everything up, the owl is looking directly at a small fort-like rock formation. And when you go and get in the small fort-like rock formation, there's a perfect place in there where you could hide, you could live, you could be in there. It's not real big, but it's the size of a 4-man tent inside there, and the walls come up really high and it's partially sheltered. And I believe that's where Forrest intended to go to die. You know, he went alone in there. It was not a dug hole, it was more of a sheltered rock outcropping shelter. And that's what the owl was looking at. Interestingly enough, when you look at this on Google Earth closely, that little shelter rock formation is in the shape of a heart. Another interesting thing is if you go into that rock formation, that shelter, and measure on Google Earth the distance from that rock formation, that little hiding spot, up to the top, the old game trail that goes around the top. The old game trail that goes around the top is at 10,200 feet in elevation. And within 200 feet of the game trail is where the little fort in the rocks is at. And I believe that's where Forrest Fenn had the treasure hidden. Another interesting thing is from the owl to the fort, which looks like a little heart. I don't know if Forrest Fenn knew anything about Spanish or about some of their treasure codes or about some of the... I don't know if Forrest Fenn knew anything about the Spanish or some of their treasure codes or some of their compass headings. But it just so happens that from the owl to the fort was a compass heading of 262.5. 262.5. A very interesting compass heading if you know anything about Spanish treasure. Incidentally, the name of the large mountain just to the east of there is called Montezuma Peak. Montezuma Peak looks over the blaze from the distance. On the other side of the canyon to the north, Treasure Mountain looks over the area. On the road coming in down below, looking up at the blaze, is Treasure Falls. So you've got Treasure Falls, Treasure Mountain, Montezuma Peak surrounding the area of the blaze. If that isn't a hint of riches new and old, I don't know what is. Another interesting thing Forrest said is that he said that it was north of Santa Fe. And in one clue, he said something about north by northwest. Well, north of Santa Fe, as the crow flies, you have the peak, which is a little bit past Montezuma Peak, is called Del Norte. Del Norte, or Spanish for True North. True North looks back down towards the blaze. From Del Norte to the blaze is north by northwest. One of the clues that Forrest gave. North by northwest. He was a clever old guy. Another interesting clue was he mentioned that it was around the Continental Divide. Well, where Crater Creek and Elwood Creek come together to form, Elwood Creek comes down, Crater Creek comes from around back towards Montezuma Peak. Where they come together and flow down the mountain, that junction forms the east fork of the San Juan River. Bar none, this location is one of the most beautiful, scenic, historic areas in all of the western United States. The Spanish were there, the French were there. That's why Treasure Mountain got its name, was because of the French treasure that was lost or buried in that area. Louis L'Amour's written about it many times. It's been in many historical novels. A lot of that area is very, very historical, beautiful. Wolf Creek Pass is world-known, world-renowned ski resort, a world-renowned highway, beautiful, very beautiful, rugged area. Forrest was a very avid fly fisherman, and the San Juan River, and especially the East Fork, is one of the most pure, pristine trout fishing waters in the United States. So why is it that I must go and leave my trove for all to seek? The answers I already know. I've done it tired, and now I'm weak. Well, there's really not a clue that I can find in this stanza of the poem. He tells a story in his book about how he got sick and how he knew, or he thought he was going to die from cancer, and how he decided he was going to write a poem and hide this treasure. I think there's more to it than that, but he said, I've done it tired and now I'm weak. I've done it tired and now I'm weak. At one of the clues that Forrest gave was that from where he parked his vehicle to where he hid the treasure was less than a few miles. Less than a few miles. Well, when I paced off the location where you park your vehicle to where you hike into this area, it's about 3/4 of a mile, a little over 3/4 of a mile. So he would have been easily able to make 2 trips in an afternoon, less than a few miles. So if it was 3/4 of a mile in each direction, that's 1.5 miles. So that's less than a few miles. It's steep and it's rough, and you have to cross Crater Creek to get there. And so just as the last, and so that could be, I've done it tired and now I'm weak. So he had to hike up the hill carrying heavy loads twice, had to cross over the river, So hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold. How could he say it was going to be cold if you were up there looking in the summertime? Up there looking in the summertime, it got to be 80 degrees some days. So how could he put the clue in there, your effort will be worth the cold, if you're up there in the summertime and it's 80 degrees? Well, I'm telling you why, because Crater Creek and Elwood Creek come off of basically glaciers from the Colorado mountains, and that water is damn cold. That water is very, very cold. I don't care what time of year you go in there, you're going to get cold crossing Crater Creek. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold. So if you were brave and in the woods, so it takes some bravery, and that should have been another clue for me to look high. Because the lower section of where I was looking, it didn't take a lot of bravery to get in there. I mean, yeah, you had to cross the river, which is waist deep, and it's cold as can be, and it's steep and it's rough, and so you have to be brave. But I believe the brave part was that you have to ascend to the top of that area and climb down into that owl's nest or eagle's nest up on top of the hill, which it's not what I would consider dangerous, if you're agile, but you could get hurt. I mean, you'd have to be brave to get up in there. And in the wood, what does in the wood mean? If you're brave and in the wood, people have speculated in the woods, in this or that. No, the wood is a very specific direction. If you're brave and in the wood. He didn't say brave and in the woods. He said brave and in the wood. Well, it was my wife that I was going over the poem with her and talking about where I found this Elwood, and I said, I think Elwood plays into the wood. I mean, Elwood, the wood. And my wife piped up and she said, my wife knows Spanish better than I do. She said, the wood in Spanish is literally written E-L-W-O-O-D, Elwood. Would literally be Elwood, would be the wood in Spanish, Elwood. I mean, yeah, he took some liberties, but he said he took some liberties. And he had, his clues were very specific so that they were kind of hidden in his poem. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold. So with just these 9 clues, I believe there's a few more than 9 clues in here, that you can literally go from Pagosa Springs up to Elwood and start your search, and that's precisely what I did. And then subsequently, as Forrest Fenn started giving more and more clues, I started carefully going through his clues and saying, okay, objectively, is this new clue is this new clue he gave, does it fit in this area? Does it work? And it's difficult to be objective when you're convinced about something, but if you force yourself to be objective, then you can literally eliminate a location because of that. But every subsequent clue that Forrest Fenn gave pointed to this area. One of the clues was it was located above 5,000 feet and below 10,200 feet. Now this is significant because that tells you that your search period in the Rocky Mountains in the west is going to be limited to spring and summer and early fall. Late spring, summer, and early fall. And here's the clue I talked about earlier. At least 8.25 miles north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. At least 8.25 miles at least 8.25 miles north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Well, that was a very cleverly hidden clue, because from Pagosa Springs to the turnoff is just over 8.25 miles. And I believe that's what that clue cleverly was disguised to mean. He said it's not in a graveyard. And I think that clue came about because you had a couple instances where people were digging around in graveyards. It's not in an outhouse and not associated with a structure. And I've had a few people that tell me, when I tell them my solution, say, well, if it's up there by the old mining town of Elwood, it can't be because it says it's not associated with a structure. Well, there isn't any structure up there. The whole entire city of Elwood was washed away in a flood 100 years ago. So there is no structure there. The old mines still are in that area, but even so, there weren't any structures up near the blaze, up towards the top of the blaze. I mean, it would have been a mile away from the nearest old cabin or structure that was there, but there isn't anything there anymore. There hasn't been for over 100 years. Where warm waters halt is not a dam. So indeed, as we talked about Pagosa Springs is not a dam. Pagosa Springs is a natural hot springs that emerges from the geothermal waters that comes out of the ground and flows down and goes into the San Juan River and flows down the stream where it joins the San Juan River. It goes from being a hot springs, when it hits the San Juan River, it turns warm, and then as it flows down into the canyon, it turns cold again. The warm waters halt there because when they flush in with the river, they become cold. It's also an interesting term because where warm waters halt is, somebody speculated, a very good speculation, that that particular phrase, where warm waters halt, is found in the New Mexico fishing regulations, because it's talking about warmer water species of fish and colder water species of fish, and it's talking about the habitat. And so one of the phrases in there talks about where warm waters halt. Well, at Pagosa Springs, warm water halts in two ways from that definition. It halts because literally the warm water halts there, but it also halts there because the border between New Mexico and Colorado is right there. That's the border. That basically Pagosa Springs is the border between New Mexico and Colorado. Pagosa sits very close to the border. And so that fishing regulation of where warm waters halt does not apply in Colorado. So indeed, by that definition, it would indeed halt at Pagosa Springs. The chest and contents weigh 42 pounds. Okay, so that's why it would have taken him a couple trips in there. 42 pounds is not a lot of weight for a young whippersnapper. in good shape. I could carry 42 pounds in there easily in one trip. But for an 80-year-old man who had been through chemotherapy and had probably bad knees and some injuries, it'd take a couple of trips to get in there safely. The chest is 10 inches by 10 inches by 5 inches and made of bronze. So if you have a chest 10 inches by 10 inches by 5 inches, okay, here's a ruler. There's 5 inches by 10 inches by 10 inches. So it's flat and square. You can see how easy that would be to hide in the woods or down in the rocks. If you've ever been into a big scree field in Alaska, Colorado, Utah, crossed over a lava bed on a big hillside full of lava, walked across any kind of a rock or scree field, you will know how difficult it would be to find something if it was just merely placed down in the rocks. Forrest published a map in his book, Too Far to Walk, and told us the chest is hidden somewhere on that map. Well, he also put 2 omegas, and people have speculated that the 2 omegas signified something. Well, when I really honed in on this location, I realized something fairly quickly when I looked at the map and how he had the map formatted and printed in his book, was that the map looked a lot like the blaze. Only it looked like the blaze backwards. And so I made a copy of it, flipped it over in one of my photo editing programs, and lo and behold, the blaze is the exact shape of the map. So then I speculated that somewhere on that map was something to indicate the location of where the treasure was at. It just so happens that on that map, I started looking for omegas because of the 2 omegas of people speculating that that might be one of the clues. Well, on that entire map, there's only one thing that looks like an omega. And what looks like an omega on that map is the U in San Juan River. On the map it says San Juan River. The U looks like an upside down omega. So the map, in its original condition, the U in San Juan sits precisely over the location of the confluence of Crater Creek and Elwood Creek. So where the San Juan River is written, that U lies exactly over the confluence of Crater Creek and Elwood Creek. And when I looked at that on Google Earth, it blew my mind because there was literally an omega in the rock, in the formation on Google Earth, on the landscape, in the hillside. There's literally a large omega right there that frames the blaze. And if you don't think Forrest Fenn, who was an avid pilot, a fighter pilot in Vietnam, flew over that country many times and looked down and saw that shape and said, hey, that looks like an omega. Forrest Fenn, being a trained fighter pilot in the military, he would be looking for, land formations and land features, areas where the enemy was hiding, or curious shapes and things. That would be what pilots do. And he would have easily noticed that omega, and from the air he would have seen the beauty of this area. These 2 magnificent creeks coming down with waterfalls going up. He would have seen the huge peak of Montezuma Peak and the lake, Crater Lake up above where Crater Creek starts. He would have seen Treasure Mountain, and he would have seen Treasure Falls. And he knew the history of this area. He knew of the French treasure story. He knew Montezuma, who was the Aztec leader, was rumored to have gold. And so he would have put all those things together. He would have noticed the significance of this land formation, and he would have probably, out of curiosity, went into the area to explore. And he would discover, just as I discovered, how beautiful and magnificent this area is. He gave another little clue in one of his books. He talked about the leashed chipmunk. The leashed chipmunk. And I'm going to find it and I'm going to read it right out of the book. If I can find it rather quickly. Why did Forrest dedicate an entire page to the leashed chipmunk? Why did he dedicate a page to a chipmunk? If I can find it. I'm seeing some other things I want to talk about here, but I'm not seeing my chipmunk. Well, in the book he published a photograph that I believe Dowell took. And the interesting thing about the photograph is I know precisely where the photograph was taken. It was taken from it was taken from close to the blaze. I don't know if Dowell knew how close he was to the blaze, but I found Dowell's name carved into a tree down below. So whether that's a Dowell. Okay, so on page 198 in Too Far to Walk, Forrest gives this 2 pages to the leashed chipmunk. The mountains are not sleeping, they are alive with the healing smells of pine needles, pinyon pollen, and juniper berries. The shades of fall are yellow with blooming chasma shrubbery, and golden glow of rabbit brush can be intoxicating. The Indian paintbrush are clustered around for little reason other than to display nature's ruby flash of color. The accounts stir me and are too important to let languish. But I have had my turn, and I am rich with the experiences that nature offers. For hours at a time I have hiked through forests looking for arrowheads or other signs of prior life. The gentle nudges of the wind provides an ambience that is almost talismanic to me, and I love the privacy and stillness. When a sound breaks the calm of the canyon, I know it's something important. I quickly turn. Maybe it's a squirrel whose tail is beating a rapid cadence that lets creatures know he's aroused by visible danger. He doesn't want to be mean, but I think he wants to look like he could be. Perhaps a tepid black bear has topped the hill, or an unreasonable barn owl is on the hunt. There's that clue about the owl. Again, sitting quietly can bring many smiling rewards. Perhaps an aptly named leashed chipmunk whose size might make you think he's one of nature's afterthoughts. They're called the leashed chipmunk because they're very little. He will scamper into view and scurry around hiding berries and nuts for winter. Indeed, when I got into this area, down around in the rocks, all around this area were chipmunks hiding rose hips, berries, little nuts and seeds, and you could see their caches down in the rocks. When the snow falls deeply, he'll go into a state of torpor, but he will not hibernate. Isn't that interesting? There is so much to learn. So he specifically points out a leashed chipmunk. Well, when you go into the encyclopedia or dictionary or the Field Guide to North American Mammals, I'm going to read to you about what a leashed chipmunk is. I can find it. I got to look up, and this is going to take me a minute, but we're going to get through it. Chipmunk. Let's look for leashed. Leashed. Page 4 and 373. It's got a picture on page 4, or plate 4. Alright, where's the leashed? There's lots of chipmunks in here. Why did he pick out leashed? Well, I'm going to tell you why. There it is. There's the leashed chipmunk. And the little guy right there at the top. 373. It's going to tell about the chipmunk. Color varies in drier regions. Muted yellowish gray above the tan, dark stripes in moisture areas, brownish gray with black side stripes. Long tail, light brown above, yellowish below, with hairs black tipped. Similar species, and it shows where they live, and they live in the alpine, high alpine areas, in rocky areas, particularly near a water source. Right below the rocky area is Crater Creek, Elwood Creek, and you have a huge rock pile for these chipmunks to play in. Acorns, seeds, fruits, berries, and grasses are its main foods, but it also eats fungi, lichen, small vertebrates. It has a distinctive series of high-pitched chirping notes, similar to that of the east chipmunk. It loves rocky cliffs, abundant open conifer forests. There's a reason that he talks about the least chipmunk. And interestingly enough, he has a photo in here by Dal Neitzel. You can see the photo. Look carefully at the mountains and the wildflowers. And when you look at the mountains and the wildflowers, you will see that this picture was taken looking down from the East Fork of the San Juan River down to the mountains near Pagosa Springs. This picture was taken looking down the canyon, and I'll post a photo of it. It's the exact same area. I don't know if Dal knows how close he was to the treasure or not, but I found somebody named Dal's name carved on a Quakey tree in the area. Isn't that interesting? Okay, we're back to the cheat sheet here. Okay, so we're talking about how somewhere on the map, the chest is hidden somewhere on the map. And I mentioned how the map in the book backwards is exactly the shape of the blaze. And interestingly enough, in one of his comments, he talked about a YouTube channel of a guy who learned to ride a bicycle backwards. What was his message in riding a bicycle backwards? Well, I believe his message in riding a bicycle backwards was telling us that there's something that we need to look at that's backwards. And I believe that's the map. When you look at where the U is in San Juan, it sits precisely over the area where Crater Creek and Elwood Creek come together. When you go there on Google Earth, you see the shape of the omega upside down. Shape of the omega upside down right there. So the U sits over the omega. If you take that map, so it tells you where to start. The U in San Juan shows you where it all starts. If you take that map and flip it upside down, strangely enough, it's the exact same shape backwards. If you flip it upside down, that map is the same shape both directions. But when you put the U in San Juan upside down, it shows you precisely where the treasure is in the blaze. If the map is the blaze and you flip it upside down, it's the same shape, but it takes the U and puts it from the lower part to the upper part. And when you go to the upper part, that's where the little shelter is, the heart shape that the owl is looking on in the blaze. That's the two omegas. The first omega is the starting point where you can see the literal omega where the U in San Juan. When you flip it upside down, it shows you in the blaze where the box was hidden. Learn to ride a bicycle backwards and maybe upside down. Don't go where an 80-year-old man couldn't go. Well, the trick, the clue and the trick here is don't go where a normal 80-year-old man couldn't go. Don't go where 80-year-old Forrest Fenn couldn't go. My dad was 78 years old when we climbed to the top of the blaze the first time. And yeah, he was winded, but he made it up there just fine. And I believe that Forrest was at least, in as good a shape as my dad. My dad wasn't carrying a 40-pound or 20 pounds of treasure, but he made it to the top. But that was the one thing that tricked me into not looking up high, was I dismissed it because I didn't think an 80-year-old man would go up there. But when we got up there, my dad and I agreed that Forrest Fenn had some tricks up his sleeve because my dad made it up there. It's a seasonal search. Since it's above 5,000 feet, just about all the search area will be impacted by some snow. As the elevation increases, the search season decreases. Well, Forrest said that it was between 5,000 feet and 10,200 feet. Why would he specify 10,200 feet? Well, as I mentioned earlier, I believe his treasure was hidden at 10,000 feet, and the trail that went across the top of the blaze was 200 feet above that at 10,200 feet. If somebody told Forrest that they had walked across the old mining area up in Elwood, across the top of that rock pile, Forrest would have known they were within 200 feet of his treasure. If anybody went to the old mine, the old Elwood mine, the closest one to the treasure, the rabbit hole that he told people not to go in, don't go into a mine or a cave, it's not in a mine or a cave, don't go down the rabbit hole. Within 500 feet of the rabbit hole, within 500 feet of the Elwood mine, was the treasure. So if somebody told him they went to the old Elwood mine, Forrest would have known they were within 500 feet of the treasure. That's how he knew when somebody went within 500 feet of the treasure and how somebody went within 200 feet of the treasure, by those landmarks. There are 9 clues in the poem. Start at the beginning. The clues are in consecutive order. Don't mess with my poem. People have been within 500 feet of the treasure. Some of the searchers have been within 500 feet, I know. And then later in Huffington Post interview in February 4th of 2015, or 2015, searchers have been within 200 feet. Searchers have been within 200 feet. Well, I was one of the searchers that emailed Forrest and told him where I had been searching and why. Not long after I emailed him and told him about that I had went to the Elwood mine and that the mine was collapsed, he came out and said, it's not in a mine or a cave, don't go in a mine or a cave, don't get injured or hurt. I believe I might have been one of the individuals that triggered him to say, don't go within a mine or a cave. I also believe I was one of the individuals, when I went in there, he would have known I was within 500 feet of the treasure. And it was around that time that he said he knew somebody had been within 500 feet of the treasure. I have a lot of emails from Forrest. He never said it was buried, but he never said it wasn't. And indeed, I don't think it was buried. I think it was just hidden down in the rocks. And it was sitting down, protected underneath some boulders. I think it was where you could, if you were in the right angle with a flashlight, one of the clues he gave was to bring a flashlight and bring a lunch. If you were in the right location and you looked down in there with a flashlight, I think you could have seen it down in the rocks. But there was millions of rocks to look under. Really a tough search. The person who finds a treasure will have studied the poem over and over and thought and analyzed and moved with confidence. Nothing about it will be accidental. And that's one of the other reasons why I don't believe that the guy that found the treasure, I don't believe, he didn't put in 10 years of search and research like I did. He wasn't in that area. He got insider information. And I'll just give it as my opinion that I believe that he hacked into Forrest Fenn's account, his email account, and I believe Forrest Fenn had a file or files that talked about, or that he had all the searchers that were the closest or had the best clues. And I believe that's why some of the other searchers who are more savvy technically than I am knew that somebody had accessed the emails that they had sent to Forrest. And that's what I think one or two of the lawsuits were about, was that somebody had hacked into Forrest's emails and they believed had got insider information. And that's what one of the lawsuits was about, was they knew their email had been hacked somehow. And they believed that somebody got their information and had found the treasure, or had figured out where it was. Well, if there was a number of treasure hunters that were very close, and Forrest had a file that said these are the closest to the treasure, if somebody hacked into that account and got that information by cross-referencing all the information in there, he would have a pretty damn good idea where to look, especially if Forrest made any notes in that file. But I can tell you that Jack, when he came into that area, he spent some time in there. He was in there for a couple of days, but he never looked anywhere else other than into one general area of about a half acre. That's where I got all of his photos on my trail cam. Are there clues in the book? Are there clues in the book, The Thrill of the Chase? Yes, because the poem is in the book. Are there clues in Too Far to Walk book? Yes, because the map is in the book. Are there subtle hints in these books? Yes, if you can recognize them. And I believe, just like the least chipmunk, I'm going to tell you another story here, a couple more, about other clues that I believe were in the book. The chapters in my book have subtle hints, but are not deliberately placed to aid the seeker. Good luck in the search. Well, I believe that was a misdirection, because there are some very good clues in the books. Were both trips made on the same day or date? Yes, I made 2 trips from my car to the hiding place, and it was done in one afternoon. I mentioned earlier how from the parking area in here is about 3/4 of a mile each direction. And so if he went in and out, it would have been less than a few miles. Are you willing to say whether the place, the treasure chest, is the same as the one where you had previously plotted to have your bones rest forever? And Forrest said, yes, it is. And that's why I believe when Forrest's biography comes out that he's going to reveal in there the location of where the treasure was hidden. And I believe it was up in the owl's nest, up in the rocks. Is the blaze one single subject? In a word, yes. Playing a hunch is not worth much in the search for those who start out by looking for the blaze. You're wasting your time. So you have to start at the beginning of the poem and work your way up. It took me 2 years after I found where I believe the general location was to find the blaze. When I finally saw the blaze and recognized it for what it was, it took me 2 years. Would you like to know if the blaze could be found during the day without a flashlight? I would say yes. So you can obviously see it during the day without a flashlight. So it's something you can see. Did the same 9 clues exist when you were a kid, and to your estimation, will they still exist in 100 or 1,000 years? The clues did not exist when I was a kid, but most of the places the clues refer to did. I think they might still exist in 100 years, but the geography probably will change before we reach the next millennia. So it's got to be something pretty stable, pretty secure, pretty big, pretty substantial for him to be able to make that statement. And indeed, this big rock pile fits that definition. Okay. So some of the things that were significant to Forrest, obviously, in his books were waterfalls, creeks and rivers, beautiful country and wildlife, mountains, fishing, he talked about He talked about an interesting little story and photo that he has is of the Karst Cliff, where he was rescued when he was rescued from his, when he crashed his aircraft in Vietnam and he was rescued. he gave a picture of a karst cliff and where he had landed and where he was rescued. And I believe that karst cliff it is very similar to the Blaze. The Blaze is a big karst cliff with a top, a middle, a bottom, and all the things I believe on the cliff, the points line up with where the treasure was found. When you look at the photos that I'm going to put the karst cliff. There's another very interesting little story that he dedicates a page to about when he was out, I believe he was in Wyoming at this time, and he was out hiking. I think they were looking for arrowheads, Indian, Native American things, and he found an old pioneer, grave. There he is right there. There's the photo. It says, on the grave, it says, Mary M. Chas, C-H-A-S. Elmer Gutteri, an arrowhead collector and friend from Indiana, took this photograph of me standing beside a small fenced-in marble grave marker. It had fallen on its side, and I rightened it. The inscription read in part, Mary M., wife of Chas, Washington, September 11th, 1838. Elmer and I had been walking across the sand dunes of southwestern Wyoming when we happened upon this remote spot on a small rise. There was nothing but raw nature for many miles in every direction. We thought it was a special place to be buried. I know Mary is resting in peace. Well, Forrest, that was a very, very clever little clue. Why would he dedicate a part of the story? Why was that a significant thing to Forrest? Well, Forrest had a lot of movie star friends and people that came to stay at his place and did business with him at his art gallery. And one of these individuals was a movie star that starred in a movie. And in the movie, the guy the movie was about had a 6-foot-tall imaginary friend, a hookah, that was a rabbit. Okay, so this friend of Forrest Chase starred in a movie about a 6-foot-tall hookah imaginary rabbit. The name of the guy in the movie was Elwood P. Dowd. Elwood P. Dowd, which is very interesting because Elwood just happens to be the name of the mining town where I believe the chase starts. Elwood, the town, the little old mining town of Elwood that's no longer there. So the man in the movie star friend of Forrest's name in the movie was Elwood P. Dowd. And at one time in his clues, Forrest talks about a rabbit. He gives a picture of a very colorful I believe it's a Vietnam bomber jacket that has a picture of a Playboy bunny that's pink on there. Well, in this movie about Elwood and the hookah, the 6-foot rabbit, which coincidentally was written by Mary Chase, C-H-A-S-E. This tombstone was Mary Chas, C-H-A-S, a play on words, Mary Chase. Forrest a couple of times referred to his treasure hunt as a chase, the chase. And so he put this clue in there to clue you in on this movie star friend of his who starred in this movie about Elwood and about this 6-foot-tall rabbit. I know that sounds strange to you, but when you look on Google Earth at the blaze from the sky, next to Google Earth is a large, in the landscape, a large cartoon rabbit. A large cartoon rabbit that seems to be pointing down towards where I believe the treasure chest was hidden. Below the rabbit, next to the rabbit's foot, is the mine, the rabbit hole that you're told not to go in, the rabbit hole. And so there's a lot of really subtle clues and interesting things that Forrest has sprinkled in. And I believe this Mary Chase is a clue to the Mary Chase, Mary Chaz, Mary Chase, to tie it all together to that location. He put things in there that seem to have no significance that tie into this. I believe Forrest's reasoning why he was doing these things, why he was given some of these clues, was to make dang sure that there was no way whatsoever that the person that found the right location would be able to not see the clues and realize they were there. And that's how confident I am of this. All these clues are there. Okay, well, there's a lot of other clues, there's a lot of other things we could talk about. But in another year, I hope we find out where the chest was hidden. And I believe that I'm going to be vindicated. I believe there's going to be some people that are going to realize that I knew where it was. And we may never know. You know, the individual that publishes his Forrest's biography, he may leave some things out. He may not tell us. He may decide, he may change his mind once he reads it. I don't know. Maybe Forrest doesn't say in there where he was going to go. I suspect he did, because the individual that found it would have found his autobiography, so he would have obviously already know where he was at. So I'm hoping that it's in there, and I hope that it's revealed. I think this may cause a few problems if it is for the finder. It may cause a few problems for other people. I don't know, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Thanks. Have a great day.
Hi-ho, nobody home. Love nor hope nor honor have I none. Yet I will be merry.